Years ago, I was taking one of those standardized tests, and sometimes the reading selections would actually be interesting. Usually they weren't, but sometimes they were. Now, you're not allowed to have any paper to write down notes on, or books or anything like that in the middle of these tests, so I would have to more discreetly write down the names of the more interesting books. I think I put them into my calculator? Something like that. One of these books was something called Tropic of Orange. The passage involved a woman and her son walking through some sort of orchard, and the woman sees a single orange growing on a tree from which there extends a thin line. Something about the passage was just really striking to me, and so I managed to remember the title of the novel to look up once the test was finished. So far, I've at least basically understood every book I've talked about in my book collection videos. Today, all that changes. From what I could gather, Tropic of Orange was a crazy novel. Something about gangsters smuggling baby organs and cocaine being laced into oranges and explosion that expands to consume Los Angeles. It sounded completely bonkers. As I was describing this to a person I knew who also had taken the test and didn't really like the selection so much, he stared at me and spoke these immortal words.
That got heavy. Fast.
And so it did. Tropic of Orange remained on my to-read list for years, but just a couple weeks ago, I finally got to it. Was it everything I hoped it would be? Well, I hadn't actually planned on making a book collection video about this one, and so I didn't keep particularly detailed notes. I apologize ahead of time for any mistakes or misrepresentations I may make in this video. Also, as a bit of an experiment, rather than using a script, I'm winging this one. Winging it! So we'll see how that goes. I apologize, let me get this out of the way now. When I made this video, I still hadn't studied the Japanese language at all, and as a consequence, throughout the whole thing, I mispronounced the author's name. This name is not Yamashita, it's Yamashita. Yamashita. You see, here's the kanji for it. Yama is mountain, and shita is under, so I assume that this common surname originates from, people who lived under a mountain in the shadow of a mountain somewhere. And also, I mispronounced George Takei's name later on in this video one time also, and that's not very good either, and it's really rather embarrassing.
But I don't object to that.
You don't object to it?
Yes, because there is a Japanese word pronounced Takai, spelled A-I, and it translates into English as expensive. So I'd be happy to accommodate your.
We should discuss this on the side.
But I said it. I got them wrong. I was wrong about them. Her name is Yamashita. Yamashita is her name. Karen Tei Yamashita. Tropic of Orange was written by Karen Tei Yamashita, a professor of literature and creative writing at the University of California, Santa Cruz. It was published in 1997, to, I think, mostly positive feedback. The novel is structured along the days of the week. There's a section for Monday, a section for Tuesday, etc. I wouldn't exactly call these chapters, though. Rather, each one of these days is divided up into chapters. First, I assumed, as one would, that each of these days would just chronicle the events that happened that day. But after a while, it began feeling more like it was sort of arbitrary when one section would end and another begin. Maybe it's just because of bad reading comprehension, I don't know. This is also one of those novels with idiosyncratic chapter titles. Generally, the chapter titles follow the format of what seems to be the title, then a hyphen, and what seems to be the setting of the chapter. For example, Chapter 20, Disaster Movie Week, Heroes Sushi. Or Chapter 17, The Interview, Manzanar. But already we're running into some odd territory, because Manzanar is not where the interview takes place, it's the person who is to be interviewed. So, after a while, I'm not really sure what's going on with chapter titles.
I wouldn't say I'm not very savvy in all of this, but I'm watching all these things, and I'm watching the kind of fears of immigrants, the fear of terrorism, the kinds of repressive measures and surveillance that are being taken on in order to control.
As for what the novel is about, well, let's talk about the characters. Who is the protagonist? There are a lot of protagonists, let's say. This is one of those novels with a bunch of characters. Each chapter will focus on a particular character. Interestingly, every one of these characters receives their own narration style. I'm kind of envious that somebody beat me to this, although I'm sure that it wasn't an original idea anyway. I just didn't know of anyone else who had done this. So, for example, Bobby News chapters are written in third person in a kind of street slangy way, whereas Archangel's chapters tend to be more poetical and quite literally incorporate free verse poetry. Gabriel Balboa's chapters, on the other hand, are in first person, so they're really going all over the place. And this kind of chaotic feeling of all these characters with all these different styles of narration, so that this diversity bleeds over into the text itself. This isn't just here. This is a diverse book. This novel is probably the single most culturally diverse piece of literature I've ever read. It's full of discussions of the protagonists are Hispanic, Chinese American, Japanese. The protagonists are Hispanic, The protagonists are Hispanic, Black, Chinese American, Japanese American. The character Bobby New is the husband of a Hispanic woman. He's an ethnic Chinese, Singaporean national masquerading as a Vietnamese immigrant who lives in Koreatown in LA. Wow. And this is everywhere. It's really one of the strongest elements of Tropic of Orange's unique character and flavor, and I think one of the strongest points of the novel. Bobby's not paying no attention. He's gotta find Soul. He's staring at the tube trying to think. Tube's got Korean channels speaking something. Maybe it's Russian, some Swahili. Spanish channels speaking English with an accent. Everybody in the Mexican soap speaking the Queen's English. Other hand, network speaking fluent Castilian. Some's even in Mandarin. He understands it. He's thinking too it's not a mistake. It all makes sense. But does Connie Chung even speak Mandarin? Does that Trek character Chekhov speak Russian? Or George Takei, does he speak Japanese? Does Anthony Quinn speak Greek, Turkish, or Spanish? Does David Carradine speak anything but slow English? Who's gonna understand all this all the time? Is some joke? The novel opens with Rafaela Cortez, a Hispanic woman who lives in a house that has been part of a project of a certain Chicano named Gabriel Balboa, a reporter who works in Los Angeles for the company News Now. She doesn't have some kind of romantic thing going on with him, though. No, her husband is a man named Bobby New, who also lives in Los Angeles. Bobby is a kind of menial handyman type of guy who's prepared to take any job he needs to take because as far as he's concerned, anything that's above board and pays is respectable enough for him. As for Gabriel Balboa, his girlfriend and fellow reporter is a woman named Emmy, a Japanese-American, kind of weird, sexy, rather dysfunctional sort of person. The relationship seems to be largely based on Emmy trying to annoy Gabriel, and she rather succeeded in annoying me too. Gabriel, for example, really is into film noir, and Emmy sort of sits around making fun of not just film noir, but black and white movies in general. It's a real pet peeve of mine when people completely dismiss a movie just because it's in black and white. And so it already made me kind of annoyed with her. But then later on there's a scene where Gabe and Emmy are at a sushi restaurant. "Gee, Gabe," she perked up. "Here we all are, your multicultural mosaic. There's you and me and the gays at the end of the bar and the guy with the turban. And how about those Caucasian Japanophiles who talk real Japanese with the sushi man? Can we count them too?" "Sure, why not?" Gabriel felt generous. And we see that Gabe patently refuses to eat anything other than Kappa rolls because I guess he just thinks anything else is gross and intolerable or something. And people refusing to eat food like that is also another major pet peeve of mine, so already these characters were really irritating me. Another one of the characters is Buzzworm. He's an African-American Vietnam veteran who is addicted to listening to music on his Walkman, and so he just walks around town, changing the channels on his radio, and making it all be the background to his life. Also, it can help him keep track of what's going on. He is a self-proclaimed angel of mercy who basically wanders around the poor parts of town helping people. Oh yeah, and he really, really loves palm trees. He can't get enough of palm trees. Buzzworm said, "These here are Phoenix canariensis." Phoenix canary what? Buzzworm, what's this got to do with social services? You understand the species of trees in the neighborhood. You understand the nature of my work. Another significant character is Manzanar Murakami. This is a homeless man who stands on an overpass conducting a symphony. He waves a baton around, and his symphony is the cars, the honks, the closing doors, the traffic, the rumble of engines. And click 1, 2, slide 3, 4, flump 1, 2, blam 3, 4, snap 1, 2, vroom 3, 4. Just amazing. And then the syncopated rear view, check it out, and a 1 and a 2 and a AC up to max and a 3 and a 4 and a creep on out and a 5 and a 6. He makes a symphony out of this, a symphony that only he can hear. Supposedly, he used to be a surgeon, and then one day just walked out of the hospital and no one ever saw him again. He lives as a homeless man, one of the many, many homeless of Los Angeles. Manzanar Murakami and Buzzworm tie very closely into Gabe and Emmy's story. Gabe, as a reporter, is always looking for the next big scoop. Buzzworm is a sort of street connection for him, and Buzzworm encourages Gabe to interview homeless people and give stories about the homeless people, and to try and make people more aware of the plight of the homeless, or at least of their humanity. Gabe is normally kind of not sure he wants to do that, but in the course of this novel, Buzzworm convinces him that he should interview this Manzanar Murakami guy. There's something special about Manzanar Murakami. The plot of the novel takes a while to begin coming together in any clear way, but essentially some people begin dying in the city of LA, and as it turns out, it's because of oranges that have been spiked maybe with cocaine or maybe with some other kind of hallucinogen, leading to oranges being banned really in a matter of hours. It strikes me as a bit of an exaggeration, but in addition to this, another major focus of the novel is a stretch of highway in Los Angeles where there is a series of horrific, even apocalyptic car accidents that end up leaving a vast stretch of the highway cut off between two pillars of fire. And then all the homeless people come out of their shanties and stuff by the side of the highway down to all the cars whose owners are abandoning them and fleeing the highway. And then the homeless people construct their own sort of society in these cars where they even have their own mail delivery system. It's just so surreal. This also ends up becoming a major focus of Gabe's story. His, and more broadly, News Now's attempts to cover the events on this highway, the highway crisis. And so Gabe's attention is not only split up between Emmy and Manzanar Murakami, and Buzzworm's attempts to get him to interview Manzanar Murakami, but then there's the highway, and then there are the oranges that begin killing people, and then there is a mysterious man known only as C. Juarez, or excuse me, C. Juarez might even be a woman, who maybe has something to do with some kind of international criminal conspiracy that might have something to do with the oranges? Then there were scattered American tourists with the peeled look of happy lobsters baked to near melanoma on the beaches at Ipanema. The Mexican contingent would be in the third wave. I'd made it in time. Buzz's description had been vague. No luggage, maybe a simple white briefcase or carry-on. That could be anyone. The name was also vague. C. Juarez. I walked to a courtesy phone and requested the page. C. Juarez on Mexicana Flight 900. Please contact your party at the nearest courtesy phone. In any case, poor Gabe ends up being pulled in every direction. And for a while, I was thinking that he was probably the closest thing the novel would have to a hero. There is someone else we might call a hero, though. Archangel, the wandering mystic. If Archangel's claims are to be taken at face value, he is many centuries old. In any case, he is a weird old man who, like, he has big holes in his side where he puts flesh hooks through them. There is a scene where he uses his flesh hooks to pull a truck, for example. Archangel nodded and climbed down the truck. The crowd scurried forward to observe his movements, watching him secure a coil of steel cable from his suitcase. A young boy scampered up and offered to crawl under the truck to draw the cable around its axle. Meanwhile, Archangel removed his wrinkled but clean shirt with a quiet flourish, exposing his thin, white torso. When the cable was in place, Archangel secured both ends to the two hooks and drew the hooks through the very skin of his body, through the strangely scarred lobes at the sides of his torso. He moved slowly forward until the entire contraption was taut, until he was harnessed as securely as an ox to its plow. People just get really entranced with him, and he'll walk around reciting poetry. He, more than any of these other strange situations, I think really moves the novel into the genre of magical realism. Over the course of the novel, Archangel's plot slowly reveals itself as his attempt to challenge a masked wrestler named Super Nafta, although Archangel is also apparently a wrestler named El Gran Mojado. Archangel, much like the novel's narration, is wont to go off into these polemics about how the United States capitalism, and particularly the NAFTA trade agreement, is designed to exploit Mexico and cause profound human misery. And this very well may be true, but I don't really know enough about the subject to say. In any case, clearly, Yamashita is quite serious about this subject. I would say that this kind of theme of international economic exploitation is one of the major recurring points in the novel. Although what this has to do with an highway fire in Los Angeles, I'm not sure. I mean, the homeless certainly are bad off. They're certainly, you could characterize them as victims of the system. Is that what she's trying to do? But we'll get to this, to my confusion, I mean. Over the course of the novel, all of these disparate stories seem to slowly be moving towards each other, for what I expected would be a literally explosive conclusion on that stretch of highway with the fires in the city of homeless. Sure enough, Emmy does eventually end up working with Buzzworm to sort of wander around the highway and interview homeless people who end up basically creating their own television network. They watched as Buzzworm commanded the cameraman, "Louis, let's move on over here, that's it." Louis panned an apparent audience of homeless people, sitting on car tops and hoods, a few lounge chairs, and some furniture removed from moving vans. Smack dab in the middle was Kay Torres in her camouflage jumpsuit, settled in like it was all fine with her. They were all facing the back of a pickup with 3 more homeless characters sitting on a beat-up sofa. Buzzworm stepped back into view and announced, "Our 3 guests today all have something in common." "Oh my god, I'm producing this?" Emmy typed in caps. "You're asking us," Real-Time yelled back. "Have you lost your C drive?" Buzzworm continued, "Let's welcome Smokey, Pick and Save, and Pollyanna." Louis panned the applause. "Carrie, talk to Lucy," Emmy ordered. Carrie adjusted his headphone. "Louis, what's the deal?" Louis answered, "So what am I supposed to do, turn the camera off?" Emmy moaned, "Production value sucks." Carrie quipped, "It's free." As for Bobby New, you'd think his story would have something to do with visiting Rafaela Cortez, you know, his wife. But no, it doesn't. Instead, Bobby New's story is mostly concerned with him being contacted by some guys in Tijuana who say that they're going to bring his cousin into the United States and he needs to take care of her. And he doesn't really even know if this is his cousin, but maybe she is, and because he's a nice guy, he decides to check it out. Really, in a lot of ways, Bobby New probably ended up being the character with whom I sympathize the most. He's a hard-working immigrant who tries to do right the best way he can, and hey, you know, I feel for that. Cuz is hugging her Barbie doll still in the box. Not gonna be the same troubles Bobby had. Not gonna let her cry like his brother. Meanwhile, Gabe ends up traveling to Mexico to try and find C. Juarez after he gets a tip from Rafaela, who thinks she found out about people who are murdering babies to sell their organs to wealthier people. Actually, rather oddly in terms of this plot, Rafaela ends up learning about this because the son of her neighbor, Doña Maria, is one of these gangsters. The strangest thing about Doña Maria is that she seems totally nice, but her son is a complete scumbag monster who should burn in hell forever. He's basically pure evil. I mean, that's his characterization. Realistically, I'm sure that there's, more to a person than that, but this is a novel, and he's just evil. I hate him. How do you, it's unconscionable working with people who are murdering babies and selling their organs. And are maybe the same people who tried to smuggle spiked oranges? In any case, Rafaela gives him this tip about C. Juarez, and he ends up going on this whole journey to try and find C. Juarez. Now, as for Rafaela, she ends up meeting Archangel in her attempt to escape from Doña Maria's son with a baby heart that she stole from him. And Gabe planted an orchard on the property that really shouldn't realistically do well, and they're constantly acknowledging this, that the orchard is, weak, and it's not the climate for it. But there is one orange on this tree, one orange that grows early. And this orange, as the central metaphor seems to be, is connected to the Tropic of Cancer. It was marked exactly by a sign on the highway shoulder beyond the house, Tropic of Cancer. In Gabriel's mind, the tropic ran through his place like a good metaphor. A bit on the nose, isn't it? Rafaela takes this orange early on, and she seems to be one of the only people who is able to see the Tropic of Cancer extend out from it, as a thin orange line, and as she and her son end up moving the orange about, it causes the geography to expand and contract. I'd say that along with Archangel, this is probably the prominent magical realism motif of the novel. Rafaela and Sol end up finding Archangel, and they ride a bus and they're pursued by one of the gangsters for a long time, until eventually, inexplicably, the gangster catches Rafaela, and Archangel, rather than helping her, just grabs her son, who has the orange, gets back on the bus, and they get out of there. This is followed by a horrific scene in which Rafaela and the gangster fight each other, just getting horribly injured, until finally the gangster succeeds in raping her and makes his getaway, leaving her for dead on the side of the road. Luckily, Gabe finds her when he's traveling to Mexico to find C. Juarez and saves her. We never really learn who the guy who raped her is, though. You might be noticing something else here. There's an odd duality to Tropic of Orange. On the one hand, it seems like with all its many pop cultural references and this manic pace and these weird characters, that it's trying to be sort of funny. Yes, it's trying to tell a serious story with a serious point, but there's some humor about it. However, it's interrupted by these scenes that are really dark. Things like the rape scene I just mentioned, for example, or people fighting to the death in the finale. Or, who can forget other such key moments, is when, randomly, all of the United States Armed Forces get together to go to the highway where the homeless are living and just graze the whole thing with bullets, mowing down random innocent people. Now, I'm not saying that the United States doesn't hate homeless people, but I would think that this would never happen, ever. Why isn't it the National Guard coming in? Or, why is it all these branches of the armed forces? And surely they wouldn't just start shooting, not out of respect for the homeless, but because these cars are people's private property. Well, why? I get the whole thing becomes increasingly metaphorical as it goes along, but I don't know, it just sort of rubbed me the wrong way. And that's what I think one of the big problems with this novel is. At the same time it's trying to be funny, it has these really brutal, sad, dark moments that really don't feel brutal, sad, heavy, and dark enough. If you're going to be bleak and grim, I say go ahead, but to me it's kind of go all the way. Don't try and just be describing this stuff and couched in these nice poetic languages or, whatever. Like, be serious about this. And it never felt serious enough. It never felt real enough to me. As you might have gathered at this point, one of the chief elements of Tropic of Orange is that it is chaotic. There is so much going on all the time. It's relentless. It honestly proved very exhausting for me to read, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it was very hard for me to focus a lot of the time. I would begin reading it, and one paragraph would have so many references or so many ideas in it that rather than continuing to read, I'd set down the book for a moment and stare off considering these things. And that isn't a bad thing either. One of the best things a novel can possibly do is to make us begin thinking about things like this, about our worldviews, and about what exactly the novel says and is trying to teach us. The novel also had the unfortunate effect of making me find almost every scene so unpleasant. I've never had any interest in visiting Los Angeles whatsoever. There's not really anything about the city that interests me or appeals to me. I gotta say, having read this, it has not improved my opinion of the city any. Not that it was really trying to.
Yamashita
Portrays LA as hot, crowded, full of homeless, full of crime, and just a constant chaotic explosion of activity and information overload non-stop. And it really comes across in the text. Remember that scene I mentioned earlier with Gabe and Emmy at the sushi bar? Let's take this scene as an example. So we have these guys in the sushi bar, and then we have the news show that's playing on the background of the TV, and then they're having a conversation about cultural diversity, and Emmy is sort of sneering at the idea, and Gabe is sort of speaking of it positively, and then Emmy is criticizing some woman in the bar who's wearing chopsticks in her hair, like to hold her bun in place, as being like, would you do that with forks? And then, Gabe is eating these kappa rolls. They talk about the kappa rolls, and people are dropping things, and things are flying all over the place. And it gets kind of overwhelming after a while. Page after page of this kind of dense flurry of activity. It's pretty amazing, honestly, that
Yamashita
was able to begin with this manic energy and maintain this from beginning to end. Bobby New never ends up having really anything to do with the C. Juarez and Gabe subplot. Instead, he only ends up coming into the main sort of sequence of events at the very ending, where, after bringing his cousin into Los Angeles, he travels to the arena where the fight between Super NAFTA and Archangel is going on so that he can get his son back. In fact, that's the final scene of the novel. I thought that Gabe would be the sort of hero of this, or given that he is so bent on film noir, a sort of noirish hero, an anti-hero. But no, not really. It's so strange. There's another strange thing throughout this is a sort of competition between the magical and the digital. It's interesting to hear Emmy talk about the internet as the net, and they describe it as a sort of cutting-edge thing that really not many people are quite sure about, but maybe could help you out in certain ways. Now, of course, people felt that way about the internet back when this was published in 1997. It's sort of quaint now to see people talking about it as the net, though, and is this sort of cool thing like that.
Yamashita
Doesn't seem to be terribly sympathetic to the internet or digital media in general. At one point, for example, there's something about how people never believe in magic, and because digital media can't capture magic, which strikes me as insulting. I mean, I think of some of the wonderful, I know it might sound corny to say, but even magical experiences I've had in video games, or in, say, certain movies that are shot digitally. I think that's just insulting that she would suggest that somehow digital media is incapable of conveying, humanity. I mean, come on, your book can be made digital. Just put the text in a computer. And I think it's sort of not good either that she seems to almost portray like, south of the US-Mexico border is a world of magic, and north of it is a world of technology. That's so insultingly reductionist to everyone on both sides of the border. And once again, this might all be in service to some sort of grand, broad metaphor, but I don't really know what it is. And the internet's not all bad, though. Gabe only finally begins making any kind of leeway into the C. Juarez case with the help of the internet. Last time we see him, he seems to really be on the trail, finding all sorts of stories online in these forums he creates about the organ smugglers, about people who got transplants that they have since realized were these organs stolen harvested from innocent children. Or who know more about the oranges, and maybe the oranges came from somewhere in the Amazon, etc., etc. Near the end of the novel, and we're getting into spoilers now, Emmy ends up being shot and dies by the military flyby of the highway. And Gabe never even finds out about that. Gabe never learns that his girlfriend died. We don't see some kind of resolution to their story. Manzanar Murakami, in another twist, which I'm going to give away, turns out to be Emmy's grandfather. This goes nowhere. Emmy doesn't talk to him. Nothing happens with this other than he seems to snap out of his belief in this great music that he can hear, just so that he can accompany Emmy's corpse to the hospital. In a literal sense, none of this has anything to do with Archangel, Bobby, and Rafaela either. They don't go to the highway. They just sort of end up in the site where Archangel does battle with Super NAFTA. Archangel's fight with Super NAFTA, I'm sure, is symbolic of one thing or another. When we finally see Super NAFTA, interestingly, his head is on fire all the time. You might be interested in knowing that they succeed in beating each other. That is to say, they kill each other and both die horribly. By the end of the story, I was just left scratching my head and wondering, is there a point to all this? To be sure, there are many beautiful passages in Tropic of Orange. Sun-kissed, radioactive whispers through licking tongues blue on fire, grinning white ash and glowing gums, molten lips pressed consumed. Orange of its desire, sea pearl succulent, health encased in sheer tissues and lacy webs, leathery skin and fragrant oils. The myth of Columbus, everything the interrupted flight of a moth, crossing that orange globe, its wings, miniature sails unfurled, skirting the edge of its curved horizon, making his case for a round world. And also, wait a minute, people did, maybe some people did, but people knew the world was round in the 15th century when Columbus... The reason that Columbus had difficulty finding anyone to sponsor his voyage wasn't... But it sorta left me with a bad taste in my mouth. Maybe it's the many unpleasant things that are going on, but don't, to me at least, really seem to commit to unpleasantness. For all the horrible things that go on in Tropic of Orange, it doesn't come off as a dark novel. It comes off as a peculiar novel, as a novel where I'm not quite sure what tone it intends to have. And maybe a constantly shifting tone is simply part of this overall mania of activity, of characters, of cultures, of languages that are exploding in every direction. This is definitely one of those novels that is of more interest to sort of literary critics than a general reader. Apparently, this is so true that giving away basically the whole plot that the entire novel gets to on the back cover is fine. The harbor freeway crisis becomes the apex of events, caused by an orange which has been brought to LA just north from Mazatlan, dragging with it the Tropic of Cancer. Wow! That sounds like a pretty interesting novel, doesn't it? With all this crazy stuff going on, sounds pretty dark and thrilling. But this isn't really right at all. The freeway crisis is basically totally unrelated to the orange that's dragging the Tropic of Cancer. What does that even mean? Is it trying to say something about how Hispanics or the Tropic of Cancer is, moving north because Hispanic people are moving north more and more into the United States? Is that what they're trying to say? What are they trying to say about this? There's honestly some almost disturbing stuff about an idea of, Hispanic people coming to reconquer these lands that they lost in the American-Mexican War of the 19th century. Which I suppose I say is disturbing mostly because it seems reminiscent of certain crackpot right-wing conspiracy theories. It even outright tells us that Archangel is declaring war in his march to fight Super NAFTA, Might I add, he declares war because he's marching to fight Super NAFTA after getting his penis out. So they describe, his penis is flopping around as he's marching across the border, and that's why all these armed forces guys come in and shoot up a highway where Archangel never even goes to the highway? What does it have to do with the highway? What is the orange? Why are there spiked oranges? Why are oranges suddenly, stop being a thing that are used commercially because of this crisis immediately? What does that have to do with the orange that has the Tropic of Cancer connected to it? What does that have to do with Archangel? What does this have to do with Gabriel investigating C. Juarez or an international conspiracy of organ smugglers and drug smugglers? I mean, I'm sure you could put it together the organ smuggling and the drug smuggling is another element of the economic exploitation of the South by the North or something. But to me, it just never quite comes together enough. I mentioned that I thought Gabe would be the hero of the story, but he's not because he never really has a chance to be the hero. I mentioned that Bobby was one of my favorite characters, and I was really interested in seeing how he responds to how his wife was brutalized and maybe trying to find out who did it to her and probably helping Gabe out in some way. But no, he never has a chance to do that. I don't even think he finds out that Rafaela got raped. The finale even involves him trying to embrace Rafaela over the Tropic of Cancer as if it's dividing them somehow. Are they trying to say that borders are arbitrary? Then why is she dragging the border? Why is there a border? What? They shook their heads, but Buzzworm pointed to the palms. Could be more than 50 years old by the looks of them. This one on the right's female. See the orange blossoms? That's a female. They'll turn to fruit soon. You must have noticed them before. They look like dates. One on the left is male. Someone planned it that way. Pair of male and female. This is a very nice pair. Could use some trimming inside here. Also could use some more water. Some people think palms don't need water, but some water helps. They might well last another 50 years. People in the house didn't know what the hell he was talking about. They probably rented the place and only watered every other week. As a general principle, I don't want to talk about books in my book collection videos that I don't, at least on some basic level, understand. It strikes me as both being sort of intellectually dishonest, trying to tell people about something that I myself don't really know that I could tell them about, and also perhaps insulting to the authors, whose works should be discussed by people who, are qualified to discuss them. I know I might not like this novel that much, but I don't intend to use that as any kind of insult to
Yamashita.
On the contrary, I think this is a good, perhaps not great, but certainly a good novel, but I'm not the audience for it. When I try to evaluate a work of art, I try to think about it in terms not of whether I myself particularly like it. Rather, I try to keep in mind the 3 steps of art criticism as attributed to Goethe. These are 3 questions we must ask ourselves when evaluating art, and in this order. 1. What is the artist trying to do? 2. How well did they do it? And 3. Was it worth the doing? Tropic of Orange is one of these rare novels, or for that matter, a piece of work in any medium, where I don't even know the answer to number 1. I'm not sure what
Yamashita
meant to do in this novel. And not knowing what she's trying to do, I don't really feel that I can evaluate the rest of this novel in any way. But it's chaotic, it's colorful, it's hot, and it really ends up being outright apocalyptic by the ending. Not in the sense that the world is literally ending, but maps are changing, people are dying, there's fire on a highway, there are gangsters. It turns out there's this whole, the scope of this criminal enterprise is so enormous it practically can't be comprehended. And I just don't understand it. I don't know, maybe I'd like Yamashita's other novels like I Hotel more. Maybe, though, you think this sounds like a great novel. Maybe, just as it didn't do much of anything for me, you would read this and think it's the greatest novel you ever read, a work of pure genius. And if so, if I have made anyone more aware of this novel who would be interested in reading it, then this video has been worth it, I think. The fact that I've done this without a script has lent this entire video a kind of chaotic, disorganized, impromptu air, which I think is very much in spirit with Tropic of Orange, so it all works out. Which isn't to say that
Yamashita
was just making stuff up as she went. On the contrary, Even works of art that seem completely random and chaotic are almost always as meticulously planned as a neatly arranged tapestry. Rodriguez returned to his work. Only work could make him forget that he had only one son left, and that son drank every night and scoffed at his work, at his straight walls, his careful laying of one brick after the other, because after all he would die, and the bricks that depleted the earth did so to make room for his body. 2 bricks for his head, 2 bricks for his hands, 2 bricks for his feet. Knowing this, Archangel set the bricks with special care, blessing and naming each brick, reconstructing Rodriguez's dying body again and again into that very straight wall. I think we can agree the words of my friend from high school were correct.
That got heavy. Fast.
Coffee House Press, where good books are brewing.